Our speaker today, Amanda Weaver, is moving things forward through community organizing. She grew up in a suburb of Boston and watched her parents struggle to find good-paying work, especially after the financial crisis of 2008. Amanda saw education as the way to avoid her parents' struggles. In 2009, she graduated Marymount College with a degree in English literature and theology, and then spent a year of service with the Good Shepherd Volunteers in Los Angeles. She moved to Chicago to study social work and community development at Loyola, but she left the field of social work to study community organizing and began organizing students and others in the Rogers Park neighborhood. After graduation, she took a full-time organizing position with IRON, which is a lobbying, Illinois, Indiana, I can't think of the rest of the title, she'll tell you, where she has been a lead organizer for 3 years. How does one organize for change in these very challenging times? We're about to find out about her journey to choosing organizing as a career and hear about some of the triumphs and the challenges that she faces. Amanda?
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me here this morning. I'm really excited to share my story with you. So I will finish off what IRON stands for and tell you a little bit about the organizations before I dig into who I am and what I do. So IRON is the Illinois-Indiana Regional Organizing Network. So we organize throughout the regions of Illinois and Indiana on issues of good jobs, environment, mass incarceration, anti-mass incarceration, as well as anti-austerity. So we're fighting for corporate tax transparency and for a better revenue system coming into the state of Illinois. We also have a 501c4, which does electoral organizing called the People's Lobby. And currently I'm working for a Chicago organization called Reclaim Chicago. So I will get into that a little bit more as I tell my story here, but I will acknowledge that we're a little bit confusing with all of our names on the forefront. But the work that we do is really important and is something that feeds my life, and I feel really honored to get to do work that is so meaningful to me. So I want to start actually with my story and dig a little bit more into some of the pieces that were just shared, because what we do is relational organizing, and we always start with people's stories. So I grew up in a suburb of Boston, in a small town called Lawrence, Massachusetts, which was a big mill town, which had a lot of unions and was very hardly hit when the first wave of union crashing came through. So it was already a pretty blighted area before I came around, and it was that way as I grew up. So I grew up with 2 parents and a brother. My dad worked in a warehouse in Boston when warehouse jobs were good. So in the 90s, when he was making a living wage, he was getting paid overtime. He didn't have a union, but he was making good money. So I remember that when I was about 6, my parents were about to buy their first home. Nobody in our family had owned a home before. This was going to be a really big deal. But my dad was injured working in that warehouse. He was a case of products fell on his head from about 10 feet up, and he had 6 herniated discs in his neck as a result. My father was never compensated for his injury. He was out on workers' compensation for 2 years in lawsuits and battles, but because this company was so powerful and had so much money to spend on lawyers, my father received 1 year's pay for his injury that has completely devastated his life and changed the entire course of my family's life. This is something I had no context of as a child. I just felt like my father had made a mistake. Why was this happening to him? So my father has a high school degree. These were the jobs that he was qualified for. He was qualified for warehouse work, for driving a forklift, and now he was on medication that prevented him from doing any of the jobs that he was qualified for. So at this time, my mom started really trying to make ends meet. She took out payday loans, she took out car title loans, she did whatever she could to kind of keep life as it was for as long as she could. But as you all probably know, that stuff catches up to you. And eventually the bill collectors started calling. I remember my mom having me answer the phone and saying that she wasn't home. I remember hiding bills. My childhood became very tumultuous. My father felt like he wasn't providing for us, which drove him to drink and to not be the father that I had known before this injury. So this corporation was really at fault for changing the whole trajectory of my childhood. So I started working at 14. We had moved to New Hampshire by this point, and they still have farm laws, so you can work 20 hours a week at 14. So I started working to pay for my brother's lunch, to pay for my lunch, to pay for clothes, and this was very obvious to the kids I went to school with. So my brother and I both didn't have a lot of friends growing up. We shared a room until I went to college because it's all my parents could afford. And eventually my mom also lost her job. So my dad went back to work under the table for a friend doing electrical work during the housing boom, which ended in 2008 with the financial crisis. No one was building houses anymore. And now my dad works doing shipping and receiving for $11 an hour with 6 herniated discs in his neck at 55 and knows that he probably will never be able to retire. So this is the world that I grew up in. It's a snapshot of it. And 3 years ago, I would never get up here and tell you this story. I would have made something up. I would have told you a completely different story about who my family was and who I was, because I was ashamed and I blamed my parents for not being good enough, for not getting the right education, for not doing right by us. Community organizing and coming to this organization changed all of that for me. So I thought that the original path that I said, I'm not going to end up like this. I'm not going to end up like my parents. I'm not going to make the same mistake. So I went to college. I got 2 undergrad degrees. I got a master's degree. I got $140,000 in student debt because I was doing what I was told to do. I was doing what school counselors had told me to do. I was doing what society told me to do. Just take out the loans, and you'll be okay. You'll get a great job, and you'll be able to pay it all back. I also was the first person to go to school, so I was just filling out financial aid on my own. So that was a lie. That was very clearly a lie. I graduated in 2009, a year after the crash. My entire generation has been lied to. We've been sold out. This is something else I would have never gotten up here and told you 3 years ago. I was incredibly ashamed of the amount of debt that I have. I felt like I had made a lot of really bad mistakes and that I should have been smarter. Again, this is something that community organizing and this organization has put into complete context for me. So I did get a master's in community organizing and community development, which brought me to Cindy Bush, who is my mentor. She has recently retired. So I met her. I came to Chicago after doing my year of service. I did my year of service because I thought a $5,000 stipend towards my student debt sounded really good when there was no jobs. $5,000 is not really a dent in $140,000 worth of debt. But I went and I had a great experience and then came to Chicago because I thought a master's degree would guarantee me that job. Again, as I was nearing graduation, the jobs were not there, and they were not paying nearly enough for the amount I had just taken out to get this master's. But I am incredibly thankful for coming to Chicago because that is where I read Saul Alinsky, which drove me to figure out this community organizing thing. I was in these social work classes, which I think social work is totally necessary, but I was in social work classes talking about people who had very similar experiences to me, but not feeling like the system was actually changing from these conversations. And at the same time, I was reading about organizing. I was reading about people taking over streets and changing the systems. And that seemed really, really appealing to me. I still wasn't quite sure yet because I had spent so much time telling myself that my story wasn't really my story. that those things about being poor and all of this debt, that wasn't really me. Like, I was going to be okay. I had spent a lot of time lying to myself and feeling very ashamed. So I spent 2 years in my master's program being really excited about the idea of taking on the system and changing the system, and every time someone would ask me why, I wouldn't be able to answer. I wouldn't be able to say, I would just say, I think justice is right. I would have a very generic answer. And that all changed when I met Cindy and we do a week-long training. A lot of what we do as an organization is we train people to have a public life. We train people to understand that you have every right to go out and push your politicians, to push your electeds, to take what you want in the public arena. So I went to this training a week after meeting my mentor. I was terrified. I had heard that this was going to change my life, and I wasn't quite sure what part of my life I wanted changed. But I'm very glad that I took the risk, because I went to this training, and the first 3 days of it, I still could not answer anybody why I was there. So we do agitational training. We talk about agitation as an act of love. We push people to talk about their real story, about what's really underneath their passion for the work, and also agitate people to take risks in the public arena. So I was sitting in trainings with people asking me why over and over again. Why did I care about this stuff? Why was I crying every time somebody asked me? But I had, I was 24 at that point. I had a lot of years of practicing saying, this stuff isn't about me. This isn't about me. This isn't my story. This stuff doesn't affect me. And about 4 days into that training, I realized this was a place that I not only could, but had to say what my real story was. So this was the first time in my life that I stood up and said, this is who I am. This is what happened to me. This is who my family is. And folks put that into context for me. It was no longer that my dad hadn't been careful enough or didn't have the right education, so he shouldn't have been working in that warehouse anymore. There was a context given to me that people were actually making money off of the pain that my family had gone through and the pain that I was continuing to go through. People were making money, and still are, off of my debt, off of the fact that when my husband and I went to go get a loan to buy a condo, that the bank laughed at us. Somebody is making money off of that pain that was caused by that. And eventually through that week, I stopped crying, and I got really, really angry. I got really angry that this was happening, and really thankful that someone had put into context for me that this wasn't just about me. There were 60 other people at this training who all had stories about how this structure and this crisis was affecting them and had been affecting them. And I felt hopeful for the first time in a really, really long time. I had just had a huge relief that this wasn't about me, that somebody had sold me a bad product. Somebody had told me that the American dream still existed and that these were the steps, and I did it, just like 53% of people in my generation who have college degrees but are underemployed. And that my parents actually are the hardest working people I've ever met. They shouldn't be believing that they will never retire. But the crisis that got very, very real for me. Before this training, before organizing, it was just me and my shame sitting alone. And what I learned in that training is that telling our stories and putting it out there and putting into context who is actually creating this crisis is liberation. So that's what I learned at training, and I haven't looked back since. I had no intention on being a community organizer. I had no idea what I was going to do. I figured I'd graduate with another degree and be unemployed for a little while. But this training changed my life. The first year of organizing, I worked 40 hours a week, probably more than that. No organizer really works 40 hours a week for free, because I just could not get enough of it. So I left this training, and the first thing that I did is I started organizing at Loyola University. So I grew up very devoutly Catholic, which changed over the course of my teenage years and as I got to college. But the one thing that I always believed in was the social teachings of Catholicism. And I was really excited to go to a Jesuit school that shared those values. And then I came back from training and my eyes were opened, that I was just at another corporation. I was attending a corporation that was selling out the students and the student body. So I went back to school and I started organizing undergrads and graduate students against a meal plan that was going to cost students, some of them their entire scholarship money was just going to go towards their meal plan, which was going to line the pockets of Aramark, a very, very wealthy corporation. So we organized for about 6 months and learned a lot of lessons. I want to stick here for a second with the theme of stories, because this meal plan was only going to affect 2 years, just freshmen and sophomores. Most of the students that I was organizing with were seniors, but they felt the same way I did. This school, they had come to the school because they tout social justice. They talk about how we have to go out into the world and change things. But right on campus, they were taking advantage of some of the most vulnerable students by requiring them to just fork over money for this corporation. So I was completely inspired getting back from training and listening to these student stories. Because the first thing we do in organizing is we share our story, but we ask other people to take the risk and do the same. So I sat down with dozens and dozens of students when I got back, and I asked them, why do you care so much? Why does this one act of unfairness seem so important to you? And students shared with me that they had felt, this just felt like other times they had been treated badly in their lives. Very often young people are treated like their voices don't matter. And this wasn't the first time that these students have been treated like their voices didn't matter. This just seemed like a way they could actually fight back. So after talking to dozens and dozens of students, we did actions on campus. We learned a lot of lessons about exactly how much corporate power was in that university, because we realized the contract had been signed before any students ever found out about this meal plan and this change. But we were able to get quite a reaction out of the president, and students have now gone on and left the school and are organizing in other parts of the country. So that was the very first thing that I did leaving training, and I was completely inspired by the fact that oftentimes our generation, millennials, are talked about like we don't care, we expect everything, and in Iron we actually have student groups on 6 campuses that are, we did a public meeting 2 years ago with 2,400 people, and 700 of those people were college students who are fighting back because across the country, universities and administrations are taking advantage of people. So that was the very first campaign that I ran. We did not win. That was very hard for me to deal with. I felt like I had set these folks up for a victory and I couldn't deliver. But the lesson in that is that this university doesn't serve students. And the students are still there organizing against other issues that really don't live up to the values of the university. So that was a great learning experience, but I knew that I wanted to organize with people like my parents, people, not just young people, but I wanted to organize in a diverse community. And luckily, Rogers Park offers that. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but Rogers Park is one of the most diverse communities, at least in the city, if not the country. And so I moved on to organizing outside of universities and organizing in Rogers Park. And the first thing that I did there was I started organizing with Section 8 tenants. And hearing the stories there, my family and I had been evicted from a lot of homes. We had been in public housing for a short period. So this really connected to my story. I knew what it felt like to be in these situations. And most of it's 99% African American, and 85% of the people who live there are single mothers. So for me, this crisis was very plainly pointed out that this was the fact that these people were living in squalor, like they are living without stoves, functioning stoves. We had one woman whose 2-year-old ended up in the hospital with a broken leg because she had been waiting for a closet door to be fixed for years. So these stories aren't happening because there's not money to fix these things. This is another corporation that is lining their pockets with state money that is supposed to be taking care of people, some of our most vulnerable, like women and children. It just wasn't happening. So listening to people's stories was very, very important in this campaign. So obviously, being a white woman going in to work with predominantly African American women, it took me actually sitting down and listening to people's stories. Sometimes when I felt like I actually can't hear this because the story is so painful, but people were so willing and so trusting to actually tell me, and willing to fight. So these were women who their entire lives have been told that they're worthless. And I knew what that felt like, and I knew I wanted to be in that fight with them. So we did. We had a lot of fun on this campaign. We organized a solid group of 20 women who were willing to do actions, were willing to go down and sit in the office until they were seen. And we were able to get a lot of victories. We were able to get some of these stoves fixed. There were stoves that would literally catch on fire. I had one woman who was trying to cook Thanksgiving dinner for her family, and her stove caught on fire during that. No one should have to go through that. So we got her stove fixed. She was able to actually have her family over for dinner and just meet just things that, most of us don't even have to think about. Having a screen that you're in your window so you're not worrying if your kid is going to fall out. So we were able to take care of some of those issues, which was great, and folks were ready to get in the bigger struggle. But unfortunately, this past November, our campaign ended because the next step was actually holding this corporation accountable. We could get some of the minor things fixed. We could get the individual units fixed. But what we wanted is to actually hold this corporation accountable. We wanted them to have to pay for all of the unsafe conditions. And the only way to do that was to have the city of Chicago actually come out and do an inspection, which we needed our aldermen to support. And in Rogers Park, we've had an alderman for 20 years who has just sold out the community and has a vision that does not include poor black women, to be quite frank. So when we went to him and asked for this city inspection and planned on pushing him, he divided and conquered. He went to individuals that he knew needed jobs and gave them jobs if they would stop coming to his office. They painted me as somebody who was an outside agitator, which is often done with community organizers who are actually making change. They try and make you the outsider. And our aldermen destroyed a year and a half of organizing that I had done with these women because they became so scared of what they would lose, the crumbs that they would lose, because he threatened them. He either gave them something or threatened them. So this is another lesson that our organizing has been learning for a long time. So traditionally, community organizing has stayed in small boxes. We've stayed in neighborhoods. We've fought for the stop signs. We've fought for the stove. But we haven't been thinking broadly about a movement and how this crisis is actually growing and growing. So we do this presentation, Hope in an Age of Crisis, where there's lots of PowerPoints and graphs that I don't think any of you all needed to see today, because I think you all know that this crisis is real. You know that income inequality is rampant. But the hope part is really important, and for me, the hope part is this movement and the fact that we're actually beginning to talk about that. Because for 40 years, we've been losing because we've been fighting for the crumbs instead of actually fighting for a seat at the table. This was a time, this instance with this alderman made me realize how much we need that. Because we can't just keep fighting him. He has too much power. So this brings me to the last campaign and the last piece of my organizing that I want to talk about, and it's what I'm working on right now with Reclaim Chicago and its elections. So this small organizing that we've been doing hasn't been getting us where we need to go. It's actually been leaving us stagnant and falling further behind. I believe firmly that community organizing is the thing that is going to change these structures. It's what's going to get us where we need to go. And we formed, so Iron has been around for about 11 years in one form of another, just doing community organizing, doing the fighting for a community center, fighting in our neighborhoods, sometimes taking on a politician, but really just staying small in one geography. But a couple of years ago, we joined National People's Action. So we're a part of a national organization that works on federal issues, but also has a shared, we have a shared methodology. We do trainings together. So now when we do trainings, we have, when I went, it was 60 people. The last time we trained, it was 100 people from across the country who are all making a commitment to go home to build power. So we're really talking about building power collectively. How do we take on the powers that be, and acknowledging who has power, and that it's not the people who share our values. And that when people who share our values actually get to be the people in power, the world can look a lot differently. So one of the ways that we're talking about doing that nationally and here in Chicago and in Illinois is by electing our own people. So people like the alderman in Rogers Park are not going to cut it. Putting as many people as we can in his office isn't going to move him. So we're on a path to actually talking to voters and running our own people, our own leaders, people who share our values. And we've actually been pretty successful. So we have now elected 2 state reps that come out of our membership. So Will Guzzardi in the 39th district, we worked with him largely, and we were a large part of getting him elected. And then we also just elected one of our members as alderman, Carlos Rosa, in the 35th ward. So we know that we have to keep doing this issue work. But as long as we are staying away from completely staying out of electoral politics, we're never going to get the people in power that actually care, that can make the difference. So we're continuing to do the work on the ground with the issue work around good jobs and environment, because we know those things are really important. But no matter how good of an issue we cut or how well we talk about something, if we don't have the people in power who share our values, who are going to deliver on our values, we'll never get where we need to be. So with National People's Action, we're one of 35 organizations across the country in 18 states that are pushing the same agenda. And this is really where I get my hope to keep doing this, because the one thing that I have to do every day to do this work is I have to wake up and I have to stay angry in some way. I have to stay angry about what this corporation did to my family. I have to stay angry about the fact that I see it happening in my community. I see the crisis in my community every day. But being angry can be really exhausting. You can't just be angry to do this work. You have to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for me, it's really this movement. And that the movement looks so diverse. We have high school students, college students, we have senior citizens, we have people who have families, and we have every race at the table, and every economic background as well, because we believe firmly that this isn't just about being poor, that you can be doing okay and still the structures that be are not working. Racism, sexism, classism are all at play here, and if we don't all get on the same page and we don't have a diverse group of people taking on a movement, we're never going to win back the things that we need to. So seeing these folks in a room and being a part of this movement is what gives me hope to keep getting up and building these relationships. And the other thing is that it is about relationships, right? That we don't just go out and say, hey, come to this rally. We even in elections, we don't just go to people's doors and say, this is a candidate that we really believe in. We actually start every conversation on a door when we're working on an election with, what is your vision for the city of Chicago? What are the issues in your neighborhood? And overwhelmingly, we've had people actually break into tears at the door because nobody has asked them that. And they don't actually believe that anybody cares. My husband actually was making calls a couple weeks ago for one of our aldermanic candidates, and he asked this person on the other end, what are some of the issues you're dealing with? And she sighed and said, you know what, there's too many. There's just too many. I've been unemployed for 3 years. There's no jobs. And no politician is going to care about that. And she started crying. And my husband had the opportunity to talk to her about, we hear you. Like that overwhelmingly has been the case. But this just happened to be in a ward where we were running one of our members that we really know shares our values and is going to fight for the things that we need at the city level. And we ultimately were able to move this woman to say, you know what, it's not going to fix your problems right now, but this person that you have an opportunity to elect actually shares your values and actually does care about your story. And she agreed to go out and vote and was able to have that conversation. So we want to have transformational conversations with people. We want to have transformational relationships with people. So this isn't just about, handing out a flyer or having the biggest rally. This is about actually building one-on-one relationships with people because we know that this crisis is affecting everyone. And unless we all get to a place where we can actually express it and we can talk about it and we can push each other in a real way to take a risk and step out in the public arena, we're all going to be where I was 3 years ago. We're all going to be sitting in our own shame and our own guilt about what mistake did I make? How did I end up here? With no context to the fact you probably did all the right things. And even if you made a couple mistakes along the way, you should never be in the position you are now. We are in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. No one should be feeling the things that I was feeling. No one should be going without food. No one should be going out without a living wage. But this dividing and conquering, the not sharing our stories, the shame that we feel about our failures, oftentimes that aren't even our failures, keep us really secluded. So much of my work is actually just meeting people in coffee shops and asking them about their story and asking them to share and moving them into a training situation or moving them into a leadership position where they can actually step out in the public arena and say, I'm worth your time. You have to listen to me. And I want to act on my values and I want to change what this world looks like. So I feel honored to be able to do that work. And I know when I haven't scheduled enough of those conversations because that's when I'm really tired at the end of the week and I don't have the spark and the hope, because the spark and the hope comes from those stories. It comes from those people that I know are going to be in it for the long haul with me, even when the struggle gets harder, because I do believe it's only going to get harder before it gets better. I never had that growing up. I sat in a lot of shame. I sat by myself. I didn't have a community. And now I'm a part of creating it. So I feel really, really honored to be able to do that. And I've met people and built relationships with people that I never would have imagined. My parents, when I tell them stories, I'm sure they're shaking their heads on the other end because they can't believe it either. But I feel like this is what I was called to do, and I feel really honored to do it. And that is the path that I see for change, is in these stories, is in community organizing. Because I think that we all see the hard work. I'm sure we all watch the news, we see the rallies, we see what's happening in the media, but what we don't see is those individual stories. We don't see who those people actually are out there on the front lines. And we need a whole lot more of them if we're going to actually build a movement, but the good news is I see the sparks. So we'll be in DC actually at the end of April with about 1,000, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people from across the country taking over the Capitol. We do it once a year. And it's something I very much look forward to. So thank you for letting me share my story with you all. I hope that at some point I may get the chance to hear some of your stories as well.